I think I was, like many people, very intimidated by wine, but I was working for a startup food website and I had taken over just writing about like all drinks in general. I had gotten kind of a random little kind of nothing of an assignment to go interview a bartender at a wine bar there in New York called Terroir, which is, I think, one of the greatest wine bars in the planet. And the guy just spoke with such enthusiasm about wine and what his job was and wines he was excited about, that it was such like an eye-opening experience for me. And I thought, oh my God, like I write about wine, but I don't know that I know this much.
Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hough, and I'm delighted that you're joining us as we get between the vines with some of the best wine writing out there. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and enjoy the show with the Italian Wine Podcast.
This month, our guest is the Boston-based writer, wine professional, and illustrator, Maryse Chevriere. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. I've been practicing a couple of times, close enough. Maryse is the author and illustrator of How to Sound Wine Smart, a new book published by Simon Element and on sale from the 14th of July. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And we don't get many illustrators on the show, so it's good to have an artist on the show as well.
I'm very much an amateur artist, but it is fun.
Yeah. We'll come on to that in a moment. But first, you're based in Boston, a city that we don't necessarily associate with wine.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's because of the Cheers sitcom that some of our older listeners might be familiar with. But where did your interest in wine begin?
I think wine came to me, a little bit. My dad was from Bordeaux. Generations back, there was a vineyard. A great-great-grandfather was, importer distributor. So I think that was a little bit percolating kind of in the back in some ways. But generally, I've just always been interested in food, restaurants, hospitality, all of that. I always knew I wanted to be involved in food writing in some way. It just so happened, that that beverages was the subject I was naturally kind of gravitating towards, and then wine became the more specific focus after that.
And so you hinted there at French origins. Did I pick that up correctly? Or French ancestry?
Yes. My dad was half French, half American. So I'm a French citizen.
So you've got wine in your blood, practically.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. What about your career in wine? How did that kick off? I understand you've traveled around a bit from New York to San Francisco.
Yeah. Pretty reluctantly. I think I was, like many people, very intimidated by wine, but I was working for a startup food website and I had taken over just writing about like all drinks in general. I had gotten kind of a random little kind of nothing of an assignment to go interview a bartender at a wine bar there in New York called Terroir, which is, I think, one of the greatest wine bars in the planet. And the guy just spoke with such enthusiasm about wine and what his job was and wines he was excited about, that it was such like an eye-opening experience for me. And I thought, oh my God, like I write about wine, but I don't know that I know this much. I have this maybe like family history knowledge of French wines, but there's such a big, obviously, world out there of other things that I don't know about. And I felt like I wasn't able to get enough without getting hands-on experience. That's just kind of more me, liking to learn things on the job. And so I kind of reached out afterwards, and within a couple months, got a job at one of the new locations they were opening up and kind of took it from there. It spiraled into a harvest in Alsace, and then moving to San Francisco to work at some different restaurants and wine bars, and then coming back here to Boston to kind of continue the journey.
Fantastic. And what is your day job? I feel like what are you currently doing aside, obviously, from writing and drawing about wine?
Currently, I work as a wine sales rep for a wine distributor and importer here in Boston. I had loved working for, the restaurant side. I think and the wine bar side is so fun. But my husband is a chef, and wanting to start a family, which we just did, realized that us both working evening hours would be challenging, and so getting to do this afforded me some flexibility, and also was it's a really interesting way to see a different side of the industry that I'd never experienced before, or experienced it from a buyer side, but you see a lot from the seller side too that you wouldn't have expected.
That's something that perhaps we'll come on to later in the conversation, just about your role as an importer and the current complications or the current status of the American wine market from the point of view of an importer, particularly as it relates to Italian wine. But let's start with the book and the origins of this book. Then I understand your very first illustration when you started out on this kind of path, if you like, of drawing about wine, was drawing about tasting notes of a Piemontese red wine. Can you talk us through that experience and then the evolution of this Instagram site?
Yeah. So the book is based on, or kind of inspired by the illustrations I started for this Instagram account, Fresh Cut Garden Hose, which I started over 10 years now. And I essentially was just working in wine and studying for my certified sommelier exam, and it had some glasses and was getting a little bored of my studies and or needed a break, I should say. And so I was flipping through Instagram. I came across this incredible tasting note by Levi Dalton, who was a wine professional and podcaster. And the tasting note was, I had never seen so many roses in one room. I believe he was describing a Ruque from Crivelli. And it was just like, oh, I mean, I could just like see it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was such a great, how a great kind of immediate reminder of how visual the way we talk about wine is, and how, just funny that might be to take a literal look at that. So I took a note card, I flipped it over, and I, drew something very, very basic, and put it up on Instagram and just tried to see their response, because I think, I was looking for, I didn't really know a lot of people where I was, and I think I was just like looking for some connections, in the wine world, a way to kind of contribute in my own way.
Interesting. And as you mentioned, some people, when they're learning or when they're studying, especially a topic like wine, they're very much stimulated by visual stimuli. And so I can see how that really takes off, whether it's maps or whether it's drawings or whether it's tasting notes. You can see how that could potentially be a very interesting way to approach the sometimes complex world of wine study. There are already, as I think you mentioned in your introduction to your book, there are already countless wine guides or books about wine, trying to make wine more approachable, wine more easy to understand. What is it about your book that's different, aside obviously from the illustrations or the drawings? What's your particular approach to that?
Well, I think, the focus is on, when I first started doing the tasting notes drawings, it was mostly to poke fun at how kind of silly wine professionals can sound, and that whole thing that leads to like the intimidation factor of wine. But, it got me thinking that really language is one of the, it's a big barrier in any new subject, but certainly with wine. And often the glossary is kind of, understandably, just like the last couple pages of your textbook or wine book, whatever it is. And it's not really given a lot of focus because there's so much else to focus on. So my goal with this book is just to make an illustrated glossary of wine tasting notes terms, things that I use, I've encountered, just to give people a little bit of an arsenal of language to discuss wine, or have an understanding when they come across certain words on a wine list, in a wine shop, in conversations about wine, and to make it fun and just something kind of like a little bit of a coffee table. It's small, but a coffee table book size, but that kind of idea that you could like flip through it and not have to study. You can just kind of use it as a fun reference or a fun conversation starter, which I think is really important when you're getting into wine, is just to feel comfortable to talk.
Sure. And so what kind of level is it pitched at? Is it someone who's coming to this pretty fresh, kind of beginner level, or wine professionals or wine students? What kind of level are you pitching this at?
I would say more beginner, novice, interested novice. They would get the most like practically out of it. My hope is that somebody that's maybe more professional would just have fun recognizing themselves in some of the language, and be able to use it hopefully as a learning, if they, are doing like any wine education in the restaurant or shop, whatever it is, like could use it as a fun reference, a way to say like, oh, we talked about this term. If you need an easy way to think about it, think of this visual. That would be my goal, but definitely it's more beginner level information.
Okay. And I mean, you mentioned you're the importance of making wine more fun, more accessible, and also having that slightly irreverent approach that maybe some wine professionals would recognize when they hear people talking about wine. Why is that important? And is that also with an eye to this notorious Gen Z who are constantly being told doesn't really have an interest in wine? What's your take on that? Firstly, what's your take on Gen Z? Are they avoiding wine? And is your book in some way going to perhaps inspire that younger generation of wine drinker?
I mean, I would love it to, and certainly I think you see in sales that the numbers are down, the number in that cohort is down, but I do feel like, and I saw something recently where it was talking about how that generation, maybe they're drinking a little bit less, but it's not as bleak as it's being portrayed. They are willing to spend maybe more money on something. So, okay, maybe they're not getting like 5 bottles of rosé to bring to a party that are just like whatever. They're interested in having that maybe $16, $18, $20 glass of wine, and I think that's actually really encouraging and really really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it possibly overemphasized this whole Gen Z debate discussion. I mean, it's certainly speaking for myself. When I was younger, I wasn't going out and spending 30 or 40 or even £20 on a bottle. I still don't, to be honest with you. In my generation, we weren't massive wine aficionados when we were younger. It's perhaps something that you come to later in life anyway.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, I think the challenge is that generally, I think people, my generation, a little bit, and certainly going younger, are like quick consumers. So it's, I think, a little bit more challenging to have that quick consumption experience with wine because, it's a Pandora's box. You talk about one thing, you have to explain the next thing behind it and the next thing behind it, which is exciting, but it definitely can, carry a little bit of like a weighted load to it where you're like, I just want to have a glass, or just a cocktail. I don't have to like think about. So I think that is, that can be like wine's a little bit of an Achilles heel with wine for sure.
Now, I want to draw, if I can, on some of your experience in hospitality and as a sommelier, and then also, I guess, some of the advice that you're sharing in this book. So we've all been there when we're looking at a wine list or we're in a wine shop and we don't really know where to start. What advice would you give a wine novice or someone who feels intimidated in that kind of situation? How should we approach that?
Wine shop or at a restaurant, I think it's important to like have an honest feeling with yourself about like an honest conversation with the professional you're buying from about what you're looking for. So don't be intimidated to say like, hey, I'm looking for this price point. Or, I mean, I think again, kind of like what I was saying, it goes back to just being able to have conversations that's predicated a little bit on like the kind of place that you're at. It's not like if you're going to like I call them like a big box, like liquor store, it might be more challenging to have that conversation. But if you're frequenting, a good local bottle shop or going to a restaurant that has an interesting list with, you notice things you don't recognize, having a conversation with the bartender, the server, and saying, I don't know this grape. I always recommend trying things from regions, you're less familiar with, or grapes you're less familiar with, or maybe a grape you are familiar with from a region you don't know. And just being open to experimenting. I know it's really easy in general, but especially with wine to try things that feel safe. But I can guarantee you'll get a lot more out of it if you are open to just a little bit of experimentation. Especially with bottle shops, once you start seeing things you like, pay attention to the importer distributor. It's kind of an easy way to say, like, I don't know this producer, but I've had stuff from this importer before. I know I kind of like what they tend to, represent, that our philosophies, our tastes align. And that can be a little bit of a safe way to experiment, without feeling too out on a limb.
Yeah. And so starting then with a budget, you would say is a good starting point. For me, that sometimes seems like a kind of awkward or even shameful place to start if you're at a restaurant, perhaps on a date or whatever, and you kind of reluctant to say, well, this is my budget. How do we remove the awkwardness from that situation?
I mean, you could
we just point to the menu, for example, and just
yeah, you could absolutely point to the menu, say, I'm looking for like something kind of like this or like that, and kind of give a price point range
without indicating to your date that you're
yeah, exactly. But there are wonderful expensive wines, but there are a lot of great wines that aren't going to break your bank. And I don't, I think that's the other thing. It's very easy to associate like must be expensive with quality, and I don't think that's necessarily the case, although everything is pretty much expensive these days, it feels like. So, but I don't think it should be a source of shame.
Yeah, I guess you're right, but it just is something that I would famously go in and order this, like a lot of people, the second most expensive wine or the second cheapest, wine on the list if I was completely struggling for inspiration. And now I've got I would tend to go now with wines I like. So I'd say something like, oh, well, I like Chianti, or I like a Lambrusco. What have you got that's around about that?
For sure.
Where could I go next, for example?
I mean, I think that's also an important starting point to say, I've had, if you don't have the words to describe what you like, say, yes, I've had this wine, I like that. If you're if you're trying by the glass, ask for a taste. I loved doing that when I was selling, because I think, I can describe what I think that wine tastes like to you, but you can tell me if it's matching where your expectations are. I think also saying like, hey, this is the food we're having. Do you think this is a good match? If you're shopping retail, you can say, we're celebrating, or we're just doing a backyard barbecue, or kind of set the vibe, set the scene, I think is important.
Exactly. I read something out, in fact, today on LinkedIn, and it was more or less making that point. It was someone who has been involved in retail for 25 or 35 years, and he was saying customers don't really come into a wine shop, or your average customer, with a list of technical specifications about the wine. It tends more to be based around the occasion. It's my dad's birthday and I want to buy something nice, or we're having a barbecue, or I've got some friends coming around and I want a fresh white wine. It tends to be quite generic, but experience-based starting points that they come into the shop with.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. I mean, it's universal. It's not like you feel like you can meet somebody, on the same level and speak the same language, when you do that kind of thing.
Okay. The second aspect that I wanted to get your advice on is, for someone like me, I came pretty late to the world of wine, and I have a really underdeveloped sense of smell and taste. It's not something I've ever really trained myself on. So how can I improve my wine tasting ability? What tips or advice could you give someone in my situation? Is your book going to help me in that department?
I mean, I think the answer I would give is simple, but I am happy to say that drinking is probably the best way to really like start to develop your palate. And drinking, I find, and this I do in the book, is I have a bunch of drinking games around kind of like big big concepts. So like an aromatic wine versus a non-aromatic wine, oaky versus not, low tannin versus high tannin, because I think that is really the best way to kind of understand what somebody's trying to convey when they're saying like, this is grippy, this is not.
Yeah.
And so I definitely recommend that. I think if you're able to, drinking and talking about wine with people in general, but definitely people that maybe know a little bit more about you. So if you can go to like a wine shop that's having a tasting with a producer or a rep, they'll be able to give you some more information and maybe give you context for things, or, words for things that maybe you wouldn't have known to use. I think also tasting, if can go someplace that has like good by the glass program and taste a couple different things, that's always a good way to go.
Yeah, I mean, because normally, socially anyway, if you're out for dinner, you would tend to buy a bottle of wine. But for studying wine, for learning about wine, that's not particularly helpful, because you're just tasting the same wine throughout the course of the evening. Whereas if you drink wine by the glass, then at least you're tasting and comparing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like you can say like this wine tastes sweet to me, which if it can, it's fine. But if until you taste it next to a wine that actually has like, some residual sugar left in there, I find it doesn't necessarily click as obviously. And I think drinking is the way, my PSA.
Yeah. You should emphasize, I mean, my personal experience of drinking games is they have the express purpose of getting drunk, whereas the drinking games in your book, they're more educative, I suppose. They do have a purpose, if you like, a way of learning about different styles or flavors, or there's an educational purpose there besides obviously the intrinsic joy of just drinking a glass of wine.
Yes, I do love that other type of drinking game, but in the book, no, it's very much more focused on, here are these two words, these two concepts, try them side by side. Here are some classic examples of wines, grapes that usually have these. And, I don't want to necessarily put words in people's mouth, but I will say like, you will probably experience something like this with this one and something like that with that one. Like, what do you think? What do you find? Because wine is obviously very subjective. Describing wine is very subjective. So my goal is to give people kind of some tools and then hopefully run with
it. It's something that wine educators, in my experience, always say. They always say, yeah, it's very subjective and there's no wrong answers. But then when you do come up with a completely wrong answer, they quickly shoot you down as well. So
it's true. It is true. It is a very much like there's no wrong answers, but definitely like the sweet one is, chances are, unless you're drinking like, an off-dry wine or dessert wine, probably not a red, with some very limited examples, you're not drinking a sweet wine, and that's fine, but here are some other words you can use instead, fruit forward, juicy, fruit bomb, all of these things would be better.
Because it's really the flavors of the fruit that you're experiencing. It's not the sugar levels. Okay, good. Thank you for that advice. I'll try to put some of that into practice. This is the Italian Wine Podcast, so I want to ask just about your interest in Italian wine. Are there any particular styles or regions that are exciting you at the moment? And also with your professional hat on, with your importer's hat on, which regions or styles are you promoting at the moment?
I mean, personally, like I was saying, like I really like things. I tend to look for things that I'm less familiar with. So, I've never met at a great Chianti, Barolo, something like that. I like to look for things that I haven't experienced as much before. So, I've had some great wines recently from Liguria, a really incredible like skin contact Bagato, which was just like an incredible food wine and just such an unexpected adventure to taste. And, some wines from Umbria. There's this one producer, Cantina Ansanti, small. I think this is one guy who just does everything himself, but he does some work with, skin contact amphora. He works naturally, and those just are the, not to be like too on the trend about it, but those just are the wines that I tend to love. And I think as much as I like classic wines, I think it's cool to see, especially from Italy, where there are a lot of wines that are made in an expected style and have, some regulations around it. I think it's exciting to see that with some younger producers, you're getting a little bit more of the wild and the weird. So I think that's really, really fun. In terms of what I'm seeing,
Okay.
I mean, to be frank, Boston is very much kind of a traditionalist town.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of the wines that you might the more expected wines, I think, are represented from Italy. But there are some, smaller shops, some natural wine bars here, and wine directors that are promoting some stuff that's a little bit off the beaten path too, which is really exciting.
I guess that would be my impression from afar. That you're going to obviously find Barolos and Chiantis and things like that. But it's nice to hear that, given that the diversity is one of the great things about the Italian wine scene. It's massive diversity that is kind of seeping through as well in some way.
Absolutely, yeah. Boston is, aside from being very traditional, there's a big seasonal influence here where, we had an incredibly brutal winter and felt like nobody was out, nobody was drinking. And now that you just get like the slightest hint of sunshine, people are out and excited and ready to drink. I've heard mixed things about rosé and people not being interested in it, but just looking at the numbers, I think that is not like a trend that's going away. And there's some really awesome Italian rosés that certainly like we represent that I know that people are very interested in. And I think that's great anytime, as much as I love a Provence rosé, to get people to try something that's from a different, from a grape that they might not expect to have. I don't know that necessarily a lot of consumers are like, oh yeah, Sangiovese rosé, which doesn't seem that mind-blowing, but is certainly a departure for some people. But I have one that's, definitely one of our best sellers.
Speaking to producers during Vinitaly, for example, and certainly high expectations for rosé, and the idea really is to transition it from a kind of summer drink to an all-year-round drink. But
it really should be. I used to sell it, I mean, all year round. I think it's an incredible food pairing wine. I don't know why you wouldn't, drink it any time of year. You have some that are made to age, especially like if you have like the Nebbiolo rosés that have like a more density and a little bit more backbone to them. Like I'm a big proponent of drinking rosé all year round.
Me too. Okay, fantastic. It's been really interesting hearing about this book, and I had a sneak preview as well. So remind me again, when is that released?
So it's coming out July 14th.
Okay, and as you mentioned, it's a really fun and amusing illustration of some of these terms that we've perhaps heard, terms like flabby and grippy and angular, but we're maybe afraid to ask what they meant. Then if that's ever happened to you, then this is definitely going to be the book for you. And what's next then? How are you promoting the book, and have you got anything planned beyond?
We have some events around the pub day here in Boston. We have one at a local bookshop, and then at a wine tasting room in Lynn, which is just outside of Boston, and then also at a really wonderful wine bar and restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Revelers Hour. We'll be doing something the week after publication date. That's actually how this book came to be. My agent walked into their bathroom, which is wallpapered in my drawings, and said, bought a custom illustration and then asked, if you've ever thought about turning this into a book, which I had been wanting to do for the last decade. So I'm excited to have an event there.
A fantastic story. It's amazing what's inspired when you go into the public toilets in certain places.
I know. It is. I would have never expected when the owner asked me to do it that it would lead to what it's led to. But it's a good reminder to just kind of say yes to as much as possible.
Absolutely. And where can our listeners follow you and your writing, and where can they get a copy of the book? You mentioned your Instagram account. Just remind me again your Instagram.
Yes, so it's at Fresh Cut Garden Hose is the Instagram account. if you go to fcghstudio.com, you can buy some prints or reach out to me via email there. And then to buy the book, I think probably the easiest is to go to Simon & Schuster's website and search how to sound wine smart. And then you can find retailers there. Obviously, if you have local bookstores, I definitely recommend supporting them.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So that's How to Sound Wine Smart. We'll put links to all those websites and your Instagram account on our show notes. And I wish you the best of luck with the launch of the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for chatting with me about it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Next time in Boston, we can have a glass of rosé together.
Yes, that would be great. Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get them.